I was standing in the barn feeding the calves when my mother called my name from the doorway. The sun was barely up, the air smelled of hay and damp earth, and I remember wiping my hands on my apron before walking toward her. She didn't smile. "Your father wants to speak with you," she said. Those words alone were enough to make my stomach tighten. Inside the house, my father sat at the kitchen table with his hat resting beside him. My older brother stood near the window, looking anywhere except at me. I knew something was wrong. What I didn't know was that my entire future had already been decided. "Sit down, Sarah," my father said. I sat. Then he told me. In 6 months, I would be moving to Ohio. I blinked. At first, I thought he meant the whole family. Then I realized he was only talking about me. A family from another church district needed help caring for their children after the mother's illness. Arrangements had been made. I would live with them. I was 18 years old. Nobody had asked what I wanted. Nobody had asked if I was ready. The decision was already finished before I even entered the room. I looked at my mother. She lowered her eyes. I looked at my father. His expression never changed. And in that moment, I understood something that would take me years to fully accept. Sometimes the hardest prisons don't have walls. My name is Sarah, and this is the story I never thought I would tell. Before I explain what happened during my first night in Ohio, the secret that changed the course of my life forever, I need you to understand where I came from. I grew up in a conservative religious community where obedience was considered the highest virtue. Children listened. Parents decided. Questions were dangerous. From the outside, our world looked peaceful. Visitors admired the farms. They smiled at the simple clothes. They talked about strong families and traditional values. That outsiders only saw what happened in public. They never saw the tears behind closed doors. They never heard the conversations whispered after midnight. And they certainly never knew what happened to girls like me. For months after the decision was made, I moved through my days like a ghost. I milked cows. I helped prepare meals. I attended church. I smiled when people congratulated me on the opportunity. Inside, I felt myself disappearing. Every night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of future waited for me hundreds of miles from home. Was I being sent away to help? Or was I simply being moved somewhere my opinion no longer mattered? Nobody would answer that question. Then finally, the day arrived. The wagon carrying my belongings rolled away from our farm just after sunrise. My mother hugged me tightly. My younger sister cried. My father shook my hand. A handshake, as if I were a neighbor leaving after a visit. As the farm disappeared behind us, I watched the only life I had ever known grow smaller and smaller. And deep inside, a feeling settled over me. A feeling I couldn't explain. A feeling that something important was about to happen. Something that would force me to choose between the life everyone expected me to live and the life I secretly dreamed about. I didn't know it then, but before that first night was over, I would make a decision that would change everything. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The lamp on the dresser cast long shadows across the room, and outside the window, the wind moved softly through the trees. I remember looking at him differently then, not as the husband I had been told to love, not as the stranger sitting beside me, but as another person trapped inside expectations he had never chosen. There was a sadness in his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. The kind of sadness that comes from carrying responsibilities that feel heavier than your years. Slowly, he began telling me his story. Not the version everyone in the community knew. The real one. The private one. The one he had never said out loud. He talked about dreams he had set aside, plans that never happened, choices that had been made for him by people who believed they were doing what was best. As he spoke, something shifted inside me. For months, I had believed I was completely alone. For months, I thought I was the only person grieving a life I never got to live. That sitting there in that quiet room, I realized grief can exist on both sides of a wedding. Sometimes two people stand at the same altar, carrying different versions of the same heartbreak. That night, we didn't try to force anything. We didn't pretend. We didn't perform the happiness everyone expected us to feel. Instead, we talked, hour after hour, about fears, about hopes, about the strange future waiting for us outside that bedroom door. We talked until the house became silent and the last sounds downstairs disappeared. And somewhere during those conversations, a small thing began to grow. Not romance, not yet. Something simpler. Respect. The understanding that another human being was finally listening. Really listening. When dawn arrived, neither of us had solved our problems. The future was still uncertain. The expectations waiting outside that room were still there. But for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The days that followed weren't easy. Marriage didn't magically become beautiful because we had one honest conversation. There were awkward silences, misunderstandings, moments when both of us wondered whether we could build a life from such uncertain beginnings. Yet something kept pulling us back to those late-night talks. Whenever the world became too loud, we found our way back to honesty. And honesty became the foundation we built everything else upon. Years later, when people asked how our relationship survived those difficult beginnings, I never knew how to answer, because the truth was complicated. We weren't saved by tradition. We weren't saved by expectations. We weren't saved by the people who arranged our future. We were saved by one simple decision made in a quiet room after everyone else had gone to sleep. The decision to tell the truth. Real truth. The kind that risks disappointment. The kind that risks judgment. The kind that risks changing everything. Most people spend their lives trying to be understood. That night, for the first time, I felt understood. And sometimes that is where healing begins. Not in certainty, not in perfect circumstances, but in being seen exactly as you are and discovering that someone stays anyway. Looking back now, I realize that moment changed me more than the wedding itself ever did. Because the ceremony joined our names, but the conversation introduced us to each other. And those are not the same thing. One is a public promise. The other is the beginning of a human connection. If you've ever felt trapped inside a future someone else designed for you, I hope you remember this. Your story is not defined by the moment your choices were taken away. It is defined by what you build afterward. Sometimes freedom arrives loudly. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet voice finally saying what has been true all along. And sometimes that voice is enough to change the direction of an entire life.